Good morning and welcome to Cisilian's first ever live video podcast, which I am extremely proud to be presenting to you today. I'm joined by a couple of colleagues, a couple of friends actually. I say friends, I feel like I've been living in their respective homes over the past 3 weeks. Firstly, head of modern workplace at Cisilion and guardian of our Cisco master collaboration practice, Iqbal Javaid. And one of our resident Microsoft MVPs, Chief Strategy Officer and General Technology Guru, Rob Quickenden. Morning, chaps. How are you both doing?
Morning, Craig.
Morning.
Morning, Craig. Yeah, doing well, thank you.
Good stuff. All the kids locked away and phones on mute.
I hope so.
Good man. Good man. So before we go into today's topic, just a quick overview of the agenda, the short agenda really. We're going to have quite an open discussion. We've got some external guests joining us, so hopefully some Q&A at the end as well. So guys, we know the topic today is business as usual, but there's nothing really as usual about the times today. And you know, businesses are struggling. It's tough out there, and there's a lot of pressure being put on IT departments, and we're seeing lots of challenges, some mistakes being made as well. So I wanted to start off with that really, chaps, if that's okay. What we're seeing from our customers, what errors are being made, what challenges are we seeing, Rob?
Yeah, thanks, Craig. Mistakes is a funny one. I don't think there's been mistakes as such made. I think it's been, you know, the first sort of week, 2 weeks of lockdown was just shocked everybody. I think nobody really, particularly in the UK, was really quite prepared for it. I think every organisation has just been doing everything they possibly can, pulling all their resources together just to suddenly, you know, go from a mode set where everyone's been in the office to where suddenly everybody is at home, and that's just completely unprecedented. So I think, you know, everybody's done a great job of that. I think organisations that have been prepared for that have been perhaps using you know, remote collaboration tools, whether it's been WebEx or Zoom or Teams over that time, have probably adapted to that better. I think organisations that have already had quite a mobile workforce, have had, you know, laptops and tablet devices for people, have probably just got on and used it. We've seen lots of struggles with organisations that have been more on premises before and had desktops and not had a world where people can really work from home for a long period of time, and they've struggled. So I think, and I think Iqbal, you'll probably have some feedback on this as well from what you've seen. But I think, you know, some have struggled. They've not had devices. They've not had any of the things in place to allow people to work from home, but many have done things, you know, as they've had to. I'd say the one thing that's been a challenge and probably been overlooked, partly on purpose and partly because they've had to, has been security and compliance. So I think we've seen lots of organisations rolling out technologies, deploying things on a whim almost, just to allow people to work. And now they're thinking about, okay, how do we now make sure this kind of works against our security and compliance policy?
Iqbal, are you seeing the same thing?
Yeah, no, very much so. I think, you know, we're seeing people kind of, organizations move very quickly, as Rob articulated really well there. You know, what I'm seeing is that one of the key things that this whole process has highlighted and potentially put, you know, many organizations' previous strategy and investment in technology under the microscope. And that's potentially highlighted some gaps and potential mistakes as well. On the other hand, there's organizations that have been really well prepared, where they have a proper remote working strategy in place, and they've actually not been impacted by this at all. So, you know, as an example of those organizations that have struggled, I've found that you know, companies that haven't quite built the right physical infrastructure to support all users now suddenly joining in remotely, accessing line of business apps or any other services that are built on prem, are very much kind of struggling to cope with that amount of capacity. So that's one example of it. The other is, you know, Rob mentioned now people are at home, they're using all sorts of devices to access some of these services. They're using their iPads, their own personal laptops. are the right security policies in place? And again, the challenge isn't always the technology, it's knowing what parts of that technology need to be enabled. Should we be looking at MFA, for example, to help those users working from home in being able to access things more securely? So those are the kind of some of the things that I'm seeing. On the other hand, those that have been quite successful, they've always had a long-term strategy, a long-term digital strategy where they've thought through, actually, we have an investment in technology today, but we have the ability to burst that up and down as needed. And those organizations that have started to look at cloud services are now seeing the fruits of that labor, where actually they're able to adapt very dynamically.
So Iqbal, you said just a minute ago, thanks for that, chaps. You mentioned a proper remote working strategy and a long-term digital transformation strategy. At real high level, Rob, starts kicking off with you. What do those proper remote working strategies that we've seen be successful, what do they look like to an organization?
So I think that the key thing is around, and almost don't think about it as remote working, just think about it as the fact that we now work from anywhere. People have said for a long time, work's the thing you do, not a place you go. Yep. But for many, it has been a place you go. And, I always hear these kind of, anecdotal stories of our company lets you work from home at the weekends and after 5 o'clock. And I think, we're suddenly in a world where actually people are working all sorts of hours. They're working, kids' school life and personal life and all those kind of things around work. And generally people are working a much longer day, but in pockets of time. And to do that, everything that the organization needs to do their job needs to be available wherever those people are. And that's been that biggest struggle, right? So we've had, traditionally, things are on file servers, you need a VPN for that, you can't access that application can't talk to that application. So we've seen quite a lot of bits of siloed IT where the infrastructure and the security and the governance and all those things have not been looked at holistically to enable anything to be accessed from anywhere in the way that you want to control it. I was actually on a call with a customer this morning that is really trying to sort out, their kind of conditional access, if you like. So what do they allow people to access when they're remote, and what device can people access things from? So if you're on your corporate machine that's been provided by your company, what can I access? If I need to go and do something on an iPad somewhere because I'm working on the sofa trying to entertain the kids, can I access the same level of things, and how do I do those things? And these are things that a lot of organizations have either planned really well and already have in place, and therefore this has just become business as usual. My brother works for a large bank, and that he's mandated to work from home 3 days a week already. So actually his life's not really changed. They access everything they need to access securely all the time, off they go. Another organisation I work with has never allowed anybody to work from home ever, because they've never had to. And they've really struggled, not actually with the technology, but in more of the etiquette of what people do. What should people wear? Do people have to wear a suit when they're working from home? I mean, none of us are, but should you be wearing a suit? Do you have a place to work? Do you have a comfortable office? Do you have a decent headset? Do you have so the working conditions are partly around security, partly around governance in what you allow people to do, and also just about, are you set up, or are those organizations set up to be able to work properly? And some of what we've seen from requests from our customers has been around the things that we probably didn't really massively think about at the beginning of this crisis. So the amount of speaker phones and things that we've been shipping to customers, proper qualified headsets, rather than trying to get people not to use their £3 earbuds that they've got with their iPhone, because people need decent quality audio, because everybody is on calls all day. So it's a real combination of things. So I think it is, to summarise that, it's the security infrastructure to make sure that people can do what they need to do when there is no boundary anymore, because you're not seeing people come in the front door, you're not seeing people walk in the office, you've got no idea who anybody is that's accessing your systems. It's about having the right compliance, governance, and join up between those services. And it's about having the right set and the communicated set of tools that you need your people to use to do their job.
Great point. And you both mentioned security and governance. I guess that the logical thing to ask next is around what should people be doing that may not have had the opportunity or previous work, previous planning, BCP wise, that are now thinking, crikey, we need to get a hold of our governance and security strategy. Iqbal, what do you think the first thing people should be looking at there?
So I think just what we found is certainly in the first 4 weeks of lockdown, there's been a lot of running around. You know, everybody kind of, you know, focusing on enabling services, with security and governance being an afterthought. But actually now this week in particular, I'm now speaking to customers about, right, okay, we've enabled these things, but actually what we need to start thinking about DLP. You know, I'm finding that, for instance, a law firm is, you know, interacting with their clients and things like that, and they need to share content, they need to share information. How can we make sure that that's being done correctly? So how can we moderate this? How can we ensure these compliance policies, the right compliance policies are in place? It is now being thought about already. So I think it's definitely, whilst it's been an afterthought, people are quickly moving on to this very quickly. And in addition to that, what we're finding at the moment is many organizations are doing what they can to maximize their investment in the current infrastructure and their licensing, to see how they can get the most out of that investment today. And then certainly that's one of the things that we're helping them with.
Cool. And Rob, we're seeing a bit of a spike, aren't we, in terms of network access control, multi-factor authentication. Do you think those are the two of the most obvious things to go for first?
Yeah, I think, the first thing any organisation needs to do, and I think if you're not doing this, and I hate being candid on a Friday afternoon, if you're not doing this, you need to be doing it, right? You need to have multi-factor authentication set up to protect your user's identity and your data. And that's not to say that everybody has to be prompted every single time they sign in, but you need to make sure you know who those people are, where they're coming from, and what you're allowing them to access. And those things are absolutely number one priority. Most organizations have got this technology at their fingertips and aren't using it. There's been data published by most security vendors that will tell you that well over 80% of organizations aren't using MFA. You cannot use a bank account today without MFA. So why should you be allowing people in your organization to access your data from anywhere without MFA? So to me, that's the number one thing you can do to get security right. But do it right. Don't enforce everybody, because you'll really piss them off. Do it properly. Test it. Get some stakeholders engaged, but it's really easy to do.
Are there any other ways, Rob, as it's a Friday, any other ways of really pissing people off and doing things wrong security-wise?
Oh, there are lots of ways of pissing people off. No, but I think a point Iqbal raised, actually, which is something we've seen, is we have just seen every manufacturer, every vendor really step up and make products available for a limited time for free. And it's great they're doing those things. And we've got a bunch of services that we're providing, particularly around the NHS, that are free because it's the right thing to be doing. But we need to also bear in mind that nothing's really free. Organizations are giving things away because they want to onboard those users and get more organizations looking at their technology. And I think the world of cloud services now opens up that shadow IT world massively. And I think if you've got security controls and governance and controls in place, then actually you're already curbing shadow IT because you're not allowing shadow IT in the organization. But we're seeing a lot of shadow IT coming from IT, where oh look, I can get this free product because I don't know if I can spend any money. So you've got loads of these point solutions going back in, which is great because it's serving a purpose. But longer term, I think now is the time to start thinking about are the products that we've gone and knee-jerked and put in very quickly because they're free, because we can get a trial, because we think it's right, does that actually align with the strategy that we're trying to do end to end, particularly around security, where most organizations have been trying to reduce the number of vendors they use because they want a single pane of glass as best as possible. They want end-to-end defense and depth rather than point solutions doing different things. And I think what COVID has done is probably reverse some of that for some organisations that didn't have a clear strategy. So that's not to say it's wrong. It's just not what you would have done if you'd had time to plan. So I think now is about starting to plan for what the new normal is going to be when we eventually are allowed back to work.
Great point, Rob. And Iqbal, over to you. What do you think customers that have rushed out and they've got this free trial, that free trial, they've got the free licenses, what do you think their first steps should be as they look to the future?
Yeah, I think it's easy to get seduced by some of these free offers that these vendors offer, because it's like, well, we'll just take it all and we'll start to consume it. But that's clearly the wrong thing to do. I think most people recognize that. What you want to do is try and take a bit of a step back and see what are the gaps, what are the gaps you need to fill today immediately. And we've seen many of our customers take full advantage of this. As an example, VPN, a simple thing, AnyConnect, for example, where now suddenly they're having to buy licenses for everybody. Cisco are offering this for a period of time, and that fills a gap for the next 3 months. When we do get back to the new normal, then you can start to look at whether organizations need to invest in things like that. And in addition to that, from a collaboration perspective, also understanding what the consumption is like today and what it will be in the future. And again, we are now starting to look at what that trend will look like in the future. We know what it is today. We know everybody is having meetings day in, day out. They're on the phone. And they need to cope with that capacity today. And if we can leverage that using what the vendors are doing, I think that's a great thing, because that's saving lots of organizations, a ton of money around having to invest in these in the short term, because when the new normal does come back, we know that amount of capacity will no longer be needed. But certainly, I think, like Rob mentioned, what's happening is because the demand is so immediate, many people, many parts of different organizations are going after those point solutions, particularly the global firms that I'm speaking to right now. For example, one of our law firm customers have an entity in Australia, and they've decided that, we're going to go with something completely different, because that's more suited to the way we operate. So all of that has to, and IT have to support that sometimes, and we do. Whilst it was nice to have a single pane of glass, a single end-to-end solution, in reality, that's not the right thing for everybody, particularly for the global organization. So it's understanding how these multi-vendor environments can come together. How can we build a workflow that's suitable and that can work? And that's a challenge in itself.
Yeah. Do you think it's harder for global businesses to adapt for that reason?
It's getting easier, no doubt. But for sure it's difficult. But I think a lot of it's down to not understanding the business processes and the business requirements, because whilst as an organization you operate in a certain way, every region works in different ways. There's local politics involved and things like that, and that all of that needs to be taken into consideration, and cost as well. What something costs in Europe may not cost the same in the Middle East or Asia, for example. So we're certainly seeing that from a collaboration perspective. A cost is a big thing. So that obviously comes down to the decision-making process.
And Rob, I just want to touch on the capacity side of things. It's something that my team have certainly seen, a lot of customers needing additional throughput, additional capacity. If a customer of ours was struggling with capacity and they weren't having the good experiences that we're having and some of our other clients have been working remotely like this, what should they be doing from a capacity point of view?
I think I think if we think about, if we think about capacity, I guess it covers a couple of things, right? So capacity is actually people's capacity to be able to work, right? So it is the first thing. I think we've all seen, and probably everybody has experienced capacity problems of any service they've been using over the last few weeks, right? So so there's been outages and issues across the WebEx platform, across Zoom, across Teams, across Office 365. You've even got YouTube and Netflix and Amazon and all these kind of organizations all downscaling the quality of the resolution of their service to enable to try and still deliver connectivity for businesses. So we've seen a massive issue with those things. If you keep up with the news, Azure had problems, AWS had problems just provisioning new workloads because the provisioning engines that they use have just never had to deal with the demand that's been on them for new customers. WebEx, Cisco have had unprecedented numbers of new signups. Microsoft in one day did 2.7 billion minutes of meetings in one day. I mean, that's even a hard number to write down.
You guys need to see it.
Yeah, it is. It was all me actually. Yeah, absolutely unprecedented. So, but I think what that has done, and I think generally speaking, people that are consuming cloud services, that's what they're designed to do. They're elastic. They're designed to scale as organizations do. And yes, there's obviously a licensing cost attached to those things, and we mustn't forget the fact that because it's in the cloud, it is unlimited compute pretty much. But I think what we're starting to see, and I have already seen this, is organizations that have had things like virtual desktop infrastructures in place, even kind of VPN for connectivity back to remote servers for that occasional use. That occasional use is not occasional anymore. That's now business critical. That's how I now need to function. So we have seen huge demand on organizations wanting to stand up VDI infrastructure in the cloud. We've seen infrastructures rapidly wanting to move, on-premise workloads that can be deployed in SaaS, move to SaaS very, very quickly. I've got customers I work with that have used products like Skype for Business, for example, on premises. It just doesn't, they just can't get it to work remotely and it's not the platform that they're running, it's because actually their connectivity inbound isn't sufficient. Most people have got more bandwidth at home than many organizations have got for their entire business. And because of the way their architecture and their network is configured, all of that traffic is now coming in to a single little skinny connection and then out through a little skinny connection. Whereas actually if it was in the cloud, everyone would be connecting over a big fat pipe. So some of it is just the basics of physics around the way that networks work. And I think to work in a way that is purely remote, the network architecture, the security layers, all of that stuff changes. So we always talk about your applications running as good as your network, right? And we talk about that from an on-premises world. It's the same in the working from home world. It's just that the network is.
Do you think cloud is? I say, do you think? I read a Deloitte article recently stating that cloud computing will be a big winner from COVID-19. I guess we can all agree that that's pretty likely and certainly accelerating. I don't think there's many losers in the market at the moment either. Do you agree with Deloitte and the consensus there, Iqbal?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you're right in that, so as far as technology vendors are concerned, everybody's pretty much a winner in this respect. Obviously, we work very closely with the likes of Microsoft and Cisco, and we've seen some real success stories there. But ultimately, any who's providing services in the cloud now, SaaS-based or infrastructure as a service, are flourishing. There are certain vendors, I won't name that are still focused on delivering on-prem technology. I think those guys are struggling to deliver extra capacity and things like that. And we're certainly seeing that from a contact center space. I know it's slightly different to some of the business world, but ultimately it comes down to engaging with your customers. And we've had customers who have invested in those data center built contact centers, which are difficult to scale at times like this. And vendors like Cisco, for example, they invested in BroadSoft a few years back because they knew that actually this is where we are around being able to deliver UC and contact center in the cloud, and that's now available with things like Web Contact Center and WebEx Call. So there are ways in which customers can burst that capability into the cloud very quickly. And that's, again, some of the things that I've been seeing.
Sure. Just looking at the time, gentlemen, we've got a few minutes left. I just want to ask any of our viewers, it's Friday, nobody wants to be the first person to put their hand up. If anyone's got any questions, feel free to drop us one in the meeting, in the webinar. I think we.
I had an observation point, I think, actually, which I wanted to kind of come on to, which is more of a question back to everybody else that's on the call and who may hopefully join us next week for the next one if you found this useful. But I think, it's easy to talk about some of the disruption that we've seen through COVID, right? And there's no doubt that it's been probably the biggest disruptive force ever that the world has known, even world wars aside. I think, if you look at some of the vendors that we've seen, the products that we've seen emerge from almost nowhere, right? So we can talk about Zoom probably in that mix, and there's been lots of controversy around Zoom and stuff because of security and compliance and everything else. But everything from school assemblies to choirs to gym classes to whatever is being delivered over video. What that's also done, I think, is caused a lot of the traditional enterprise players who are always going to be a little bit slower at bringing out new shiny features because they've got to make sure they've got the governance, the compliance and security, all the other things join up. But we have seen a massive increase in both the demand and the responsiveness of some of these other organizations. So Teams as an example, in driving new features. So if you follow the Microsoft stack, the changes coming out into Teams this month alone around number of video windows and other kind of features is key. But actually the question I kind of almost ask back is, you need to be thinking about your business and the business that you are running and you're involved in January is probably going to function in a very different way once everybody goes back to work, right? So I really do not think that we will move back to the world we were in before. I think there will be less travel, there will be more people working from home, there will be more meetings online. I think people will be more productive, more collaborative, and it will stabilize. I think we kind of had this massive peak, but you need to be thinking about how you react to that, and I think who your competition are and what they're going to be doing.
So Rob, we've just had our first question coming in from our lovely viewers anonymously. With all the technology deployed in rapid speed, how are users getting on, or how did we get users to learn and understand how to use it?
That's a good one. I'll probably co-answer this with Iqbal, actually. I know Iqbal's got a lot of experience here as well. Yeah, really good question. And I think, we've seen organizations that have, I'll give you an example of an organization I'm working with who are on a journey to deploy, all their collaboration estate, right? So they're going to be moving to Teams in this case. And it was on the plan, right? So they were already doing it. And what they've done is now had to rapidly accelerate what that looks like. And of course, the biggest challenge is the technology is actually not too hard to do. It's getting people using it. And a lot of the time, technology is being given to people. And this is why things like Zoom have been quite popular, because it's quite easy. It's like chatting with WhatsApp. It's quite easy. And so when you're trying to get an organization to use something because they need to, you need to spend that time in ensuring users are comfortable with what they're doing. They know how to use it. They've got a support network. The role of IT changes and becomes a lot more around consultative support and encouragement rather than fixing stuff. Because people are now at home, they'll fix their own machines, they'll fix their own Wi-Fi because they have to. So IT's role changes. So you have to spend that time in producing learning content, making content available to people. There's loads of vendors out there that sell online learning content around the products that you want people to use, whether that's WebEx, whether that's Microsoft Teams, whether that's Office 365 in general. And it's really, really important. That's not a one-off thing. So I think if you don't have an adoption and change program in your organization, which many do, now's the time to start building one and use this remote working as a method to get people to move. If you've had to put staff on furlough, which many have, use that as an opportunity to retrain people around this new world of working and how they can be a support network for their people.
Yeah, so great point, Rob. I think that the framework around adoption is key, making sure that's in place, because whilst as you said, these tools can be enabled very quickly. Users end up with so many different apps on their desktop. What's the right thing for the user?
Now exiting.
So it's understanding, it's important that organizations fully understand who their users are, mapping out all things they need access to, and then building a framework around that, and then building a training program that fits that particular user, rather than sending out training material, user guide, company wide. It needs to be relevant to the individual user for them to fully adopt these things. And that's what we're finding is those customers that have perhaps deployed things like Zoom, who already have investments in E5 licensing, for example, where they have access to everything within Microsoft Teams. Why are those users having to use things like Zoom? It's an educational thing. So just making sure that they fully understand that they can run events like this, for example, is a good example of being able to reach a wider audience within the organization. And we've seen those types of customers potentially having to look for other solutions because they don't fully understand what's possible with their existing investment. So it's two things for me: is making sure you understand users, what they need to, and then building an adoption program around that.
So guys, we've almost reached the end of the podcast, and just before I guess we talk about next week's show, I just want to say to everyone who's joined us, thank you, and your feedback's really important to us. So comment using the hashtag Cisilion Live. You can follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter at Cisilion, or you can contact us directly using Cisilion.com. So gents, next week we're going to start looking at the new business as usual, focusing I think on agile, cost cutting, and freeing up budget for transformational projects that will give your business competitive advantage. So Rob, do you want to give us a couple of snippets of the things we're going to dive into, or Iqbal maybe?
In 15 minutes.
Yeah, happy to. I think I kind of touched on this around, seeing first of all, what can we leverage from the vendor? How can we start to look at extending some of those free trials that the vendors have on offer, so that organizations can start to extend their existing capacity and things like that. That's absolutely number one. And then looking at how they're consuming some of the cloud services, because a lot of these guys are either enabling some of that consumption either in Azure or through other technologies, and making sure that's being consumed in the most efficient way possible. So for me, it's two things: making sure that the existing investment is being maximized as much as possible, so your organizations aren't spending money for the sake of spending. Once that's fully understood, then you can start to see the benefits in some savings.
Cool. Rob, what are you going to be chatting about cost cutting wise?
Yeah, so I think for me a lot of it is, everyone's in a position right now where spending money is a worry, because nobody quite knows what this new future is going to look like, and what the recovery curve or V-shape is going to look like. So I think for us it's about trying to help organizations maximize what they've got, so use the services they've already bought. Many organizations have overlapping technologies, mainly across security, where they've got 4 or 5 products that do the same thing, and some things are turned on and some things aren't. So to use the example that Iqbal raised, we see lots of customers with Microsoft 365 E5 licensing where they're using a fraction of those services. So looking at ways that we can either turn those things on so they're getting value out of what they're buying, or reducing their licensing so they're not paying for things they're not using. And I think the other side of that is they're looking at things like their cloud spend, right, which will be going through the roof right now, and trying to find ways to properly optimize that spend and save a chunk of money. And we've got examples where we have, or we'll share some next week, I'm sure, where we've saved huge amounts of money for organizations, to give them some of that money back to invest in the things they now need to go and invest in to drive forward. So that's really the focus for this week.
I'm personally looking forward to that one, Rob. I know you've not quite achieved what the Tom Moore, the Army veteran, had achieved, 12 million, but you are in 7 figures of savings at the moment.
18, I think he did, didn't he?
Oh wow! Wow, I think you're
Yeah.
just under 2 million saves, aren't you, on the cloud side? But guys, look, thank you both so much. Thanks to producer Andrew. You start, and thanks obviously to everyone viewing. And just finishing up, look, we could be in the home stretch of lockdown just now, so we've got to keep staying at home, saving lives, and we'll keep helping businesses transform through innovative next gen technology. See you soon, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.